Kat Steinmetz, Head of Global Talent Success at Box, and Taryn Stejskal, former Head of Executive Development and Talent Strategy at Nike, currently Chief Resilience Officer at Resilience Leadership. Kat and Taryn will be presenting an exciting session on Leadership Reimagined, fostering high-performance teams through transformational and resilient leaders. Kat and Taryn, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to our virtual stage.
Thank you so much for having us. Hi, everybody. Taryn and I are so excited and honored to be here with you all today to speak about something that we are so passionate about and have deep experience with throughout our careers. And that is transformational and resilient leadership, as Maisa said. We know that in this time, now more than ever, leaders need to cultivate transformational and resilient practices to really foster high-performing teams. And today we're going to talk through what we believe are specific ways to bring this to life in your organizations and leaders. So let's first start by talking about transactional versus transformational leadership. What is the difference really between the two? So transactional leadership is the opposite of transformational leadership. It relies heavily on authority, motivating employees through rewards and punishments, and what most of us have really experienced as that command and control type of manager or leader, right? It requires supervision, oversight, monitoring. This leadership model doesn't try to innovate. Instead, it's really rooted in keeping things consistent and predictable over time. And the overall goal is to really create efficient, routine procedures, which can sometimes really be good, right? For specific things like financial audits, where something needs to be very precise and accurate. So it's a good moment to bring that type of leadership in and to make sure everybody is on point. But that type of leadership, transactional, really doesn't allow for innovation or future planning the same way that transformational leadership will. Transformational leadership really, on the other hand, supports that agile environment, leaves people really free to come up with new ideas, to look at the future of products, services in an innovative way, and to really have that autonomy and agency, to feel that purpose and impact in their work. So there's a myth that transformational leaders are soft. But the truth is that they constantly challenge followers to higher levels of performance. And the research really clearly shows that. Groups led by transformational leaders have higher levels of performance and satisfaction than groups led by other types of leaders. So why is this? Because transformational leaders really hold positive expectations for their followers. They believe already that they can do their best. They already have that trust in them, and people feel that. So as a result, they inspire, they empower, and they stimulate followers to really exceed normal levels of performance. And transformational leaders focus on and care about followers, their personal needs, right? Their own development, as well as their selves. And they're both confident and caring leaders, and people feel that. They are inspired by that. So through this leadership style, leaders cultivate a growth mindset. They create a real learning culture of innovation. And I think it's also important to say that innovation, I believe, is a culture and not a skill. I think intentionally cultivating a learning culture allows innovation to happen more freely as a way of being, as part of your DNA as a company. And transformational leadership is that catalyst, right? It's the enabler for how this continues to come to life. And building resilient practices is what allows a leader to become more transformational. At Box, we don't just have one class on this, right? Here's a class, that's it, we move on. We incorporate these concepts throughout our curriculum. They're woven throughout everything. In our manager programs, in the design of our leadership experiences and our experiential activities. So they're really present everywhere as a common language that people speak and as a philosophy. So next, let's dig a little deeper into resilience with Taryn. So I'm going to pass it off to Taryn.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Kat. That was an amazing kickoff to our presentation. I'm so excited. So Kat and I, what's that?
I said, so excited to have your stuff too. Woohoo!
So those of you who are tuning into our presentation today, you can probably tell that Kat and I don't really like working with each other very much. So just deal with us. No, it's so wonderful. And I know that we know a lot of you and have worked closely with many of you in the audience as our colleagues and friends. And Kat has been a dear, dear friend since we were on a panel together at a conference like this, really two years ago, I think now, or maybe 18 months, I think 2 years ago.
2.5 years now.
2.5 years ago. Time flies when you're having fun. Anyway, I won't take up too much of our time talking about Kat and my relationship. We will dive into resilience, which is so exciting. So one of the things that Kat and I would like to do today, along with demystifying transformational leadership, with which Kat has begun to, I think, really put color to and help us understand how we can think about transformation, not just as being a sort of a concept or a word that we talk about, but we don't know what it means, but really drilling into what is transformation, transformational leadership, and why it's important. And we'd like to do the same thing here with resilience. Now, admittedly, this is going to be at a bit of a high level because we've got 45 minutes with you. We're packing a lot of information in. We're so excited to connect with everyone. And we've got some interactive activities. So it's not just us talking at you this morning or this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you're calling in from. So what we would love to do is engage with you in a light audience poll where we just love for you to reflect on resilience, the word resilience, what resilience means to you or what it means to be resilient. And we'd love to just have you throw in the chat some words that, you know, are connected to resilience for you. So, you know, I'll throw in one. The chat came up for me, which is why I sort of paused. So I'll throw in strength, maybe just to kick us off here.
I had the same word.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, I'm hitting submit, but I don't know if it's submitting. So maybe I'll do it over here. Okay. No? Strength. Okay, there it is. It's in. Ta-da! So we'd love just for you to put some words in that resonate for you. And there we go. Slide-wise, I think that's the view there. So what does resilience mean to you? This can be... let's see, Delia, you're saying put this in the group chat. I'm not going to be able to present and figure that out, so I'll let you guys work with it. But Delia, I love what you put in here: physical, emotional, or psychological, social, and spiritual well-being. Wow, that is quite robust. So yes, resilience, yes to all. Resilience is all of those things. Yes, so words, phrases, people. All those types of things, feel welcome to include those, and we'll call those out as we go. I'm going to keep moving just because our time is short. And what we also want to talk with you about is this idea in terms of demystifying some of these concepts. Again, like people throw words like resilience and transformation around, and you're like, yes, that sounds really good. What is it, right? And so this happened to me over a decade ago when I started to think about resilience. And I thought, wow, resilience, that is like such an interesting word. And, you know, being a child sort of just over the line from the millennials, what you'll maybe resonate with is I grew up in a household of encyclopedias. And when I say encyclopedias, I don't mean Wikipedia. I mean, like, they were like books, like on a bookshelf, right? And so when you wanted to know what something was, or you wanted to look something up, you went to the encyclopedias or you went to the dictionary. So I did what I knew how to do, which was to go to the dictionary and look up resilience. and it said to be resilient. And I thought, well, that's fantastic. So I looked up resilience, and it said to be resilient, to demonstrate resilience. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's going on. I want to understand this important concept, and it doesn't seem like there's a very strong definition. And so as part of my doctoral program, I started to look at patients that were having neuropsychological injuries. And what we found is when they went through rehabilitation, some factors that we hadn't considered dramatically impacted the trajectory of their rehabilitation. And one of the things that impacted people was having access to reliable transportation. And so reliable transportation, when we did a statistical model, when we looked at reliable transportation, that was statistically the difference between someone who had sustained a neurological injury, between them living independently as an outcome versus living in an assisted care facility. So for those people that had access to reliable transportation, they were significantly more likely to be able to live independently, to regain or maintain their independence, which is incredibly important. Now, I know what you're thinking. Not all of us, Taryn, are going to have neuropsychological injuries. And what does this have to do with my role as a chief learning officer or as someone in HR? Well, I'm so glad that you asked, because when I left my fellowship, I still was thinking about challenge. I was thinking about change. I was thinking about complexity. And yes, all of us are not going to have neuropsychological injuries, but we all are going to face challenge. We all are going to face change, and we're all going to face complexity. And so in order to understand resilience in leadership and in life, I started asking people a really simple and really powerful question. And the question's here on the screen. The question is, when you've faced a challenge in the past, what have you done to effectively address that challenge? Now, the word challenge is purposeful here, because when we think about facing adversity or an obstacle, we think about that as being primarily negative. But challenge allows us to capture both something that feels negative as well as positive elements of what we're experiencing. Because when you think about it, really so few challenges, so few of the experience we have as humans are categorically negative or categorically positive. So challenge allows us to hold both. And what you'll see as we talk about resilience is this idea that there are many polarities in the practice. The ability to hold, say, in your hands, figuratively speaking, two things that seem to be diametrically opposed and yet at once are true, right? And so challenge allows us to have an experience that is both categorized as both positive and negative. The second thing is effectively address challenge. You know, so often in life, we don't overcome challenge. Many times challenge actually overcomes us. So thinking about not how did you overcome a challenge, but how did you effectively address that challenge that was placed in your life? And now, after interviewing hundreds of leaders, collecting thousands of pieces of data, what this has led to is the 5 practices of particularly resilient people, or the 5 practices or observable behaviors that leaders can demonstrate in order to be more or maximally resilient. And so one of the things that Kat and I have the opportunity to do with you today is share at a high level what those 5 practices are. So you can start to think about what are the behavioral elements of resilience and behaviors that you can be looking for in yourself, in your leaders, and holistically across your organization as you think about the times that we're in with quarantine and COVID and riots, and thinking about racial and ethnic equality and social justice. There's just so much happening right now where resilience is such a cornerstone, and yet we don't often know how to demonstrate resilience. So we'll be talking with you about the practices and the behaviors associated with that today. I'm going to ask you to participate in one more kind of audience poll, and this is, which of the following is a myth of resilience? The first one, you bounce back after a challenge. Second one, resilience is passive, does not require action. Third one, you are only given a fixed amount of resilience when you are born, and that's it, no more, you can't have any more. And the last one, I'll just scroll down here, would be all of the above, all of the above. So if you could, on your computers, maybe choose the one that you think is a myth of resilience, the best answer here, and put it in the chat. We'd love to chat with you about the chat, I suppose we could say. I don't know if I can submit here, don't want to give away any answers, so I'll keep going and we'll look for what comes in. Okay, look, we've got some things. Which is the myth of following? Okay, all right, so 8.3 of you said being passive is a myth of resilience, and we're tied with you're only given a fixed amount of resilience when you're born, also 8.3%. So yay, great job participating, everyone. We love that. We love learning about how you think about resilience and myths. And then let's scroll down here. Whoa, 83.3 people said all of the above. You guys are geniuses, because yes, all three of these are myths. And I'm going to speak to these just briefly. So the first one is that resilience isn't merely bouncing back. What we know about ourselves and from a neuropsychological perspective, when we think about neuroplasticity and the way that our brain changes with every single experience we have, large or small, we know actually that we never go back to the person or the way we were before a challenge. Even today, at the end of the day, you will not be fundamentally the same person that you were when you woke up this morning. Why? Well, because you've attended these fantastic presentations and you've gotten more information and you've had conversations with people and you've seen the news. We are changing all the time. And so resilience doesn't mean going back to a former version of ourselves. Resilience means not bouncing back, but bouncing forward. The second myth of resilience that you so adeptly spoke to in our audience poll is this idea that resilience is not passive. So often we say, you know, time heals all wounds, right? All we have to do is sit back and kind of wait for things to happen. But instead, resilience is an incredibly active way that we are engaging with challenge in our lives. And so rather than saying, you know, time heals all wounds, resilience is more akin to what Andy Warhol said, which is time changes things and you have to change them yourself. And so just to give you an overview of resilience, the three truths of resilience, the first truth is that we bounce forward, not back. The second truth is that resilience is active, not passive. And the third truth is that resilience is dynamic, not finite or fixed. Resilience is like a muscle. We can build it over time through training and through effectively facing challenge. So now we're going to move into the 5 practices of particularly resilient people. Again, this is going to be a really high-level overview just to give you a sense of what these behaviors, principles, and practices are. And if you're interested in this work, Kat and I would love to go deeper with you and talk more about how we're using resilience and transformational leadership in the context of our organizations and organizations that we work with. So the 5 practices of particularly resilient people: vulnerability, productive perseverance, connection, gratiosity. Don't worry if you don't know what that word is, we'll tell you what it is, and possibility. So let's kick ourselves off here on vulnerability. So when I had, you know, hundreds of conversations, collected thousands of pieces of data, the first practice of particularly resilient people that came up was this practice of vulnerability. Right? This idea that in order to be maximally resilient when we face challenge, we must holistically integrate our internal selves with our external selves, meaning that the self that's inside, what we think and feel, needs to be the same or as close as possible to the self that we are showing the world, our external self. Now, why is that resilient? Well, it's resilient for two reasons. One, when we align our internal and our external selves, what that means is that we run one operating system. And so we're not having an experience internally and holding that back from our colleagues and people in our lives, right? As we fear many of our employees are. So many of you in learning and leadership positions, you want to know how people are doing really, right? And so this allows for a space of vulnerability to truly share what's happening internally for people without fear of recrimination or without fear that they're going to be judged when they share that. Now, vulnerability is also the cornerstone of authenticity and authentic leadership. Because if you think about vulnerability and authenticity, we can't be authentic without first being vulnerable to some extent, to show ourselves, to show who we are as a leader. So vulnerability is incredibly important here. The last part is when we align our internal and our external selves, what that means is in those moments of challenge, we have greater access to the people, the resources, the knowledge, the information that is going to help us in those moments. So if we know vulnerability is important, why aren't we all running around living fabulously vulnerable and authentic lives, right? Like, why don't we do that? So there's this beautiful quote from Brene Brown where she says, what makes you vulnerable makes you beautiful. And I love to think about that and believe that. And at the same time, every time I think about making a disclosure or being real in some way, there's fear associated with that for me. And there's fear associated with so many people around being vulnerable. And so when we leverage the resilient practice of vulnerability, what that means is we also have to face a thing called shame bias, right? Because if we know vulnerability is important, I started asking people, okay, so you want your inside self to match your outside self. To what extent are you doing that? Oh, you're not doing it, or it's hard to do that. Well, why is it hard to do that? What the shame bias tells us is that when Kat gets up on stage and I watch her give a presentation and she talks about a challenge that she's faced, or when she tells a story about her own resilience in her personal life or as a leader, I think to myself, and the other people in the audience think to themselves, wow, Kat is amazing. She's doing all these things and, right, she's faced these challenges in her life that I never knew about. But when we think about putting ourselves in that same position, right, going up on stage, telling something vulnerable about ourselves, telling a story, we fear that people will think less of us. Even though we think more of the other person who does it, we fear that if people really knew who we are, they would think less of us. And there's 3 L's here. We fear that people won't like us, they won't love us, or they'll leave us if they know who we truly are. But shame bias is a fear. It's not true. It's something that we have the opportunity to face and then cognitively place our bets in a way where we tell our resilient story and recognize, oh, actually, when I tell my story, I am thought of more as opposed to less. So I'm going to move on to the next practice here, which is the practice of productive perseverance. Now, productive perseverance is the second practice of particularly resilient people. And what this means is that it's the intelligent pursuit of a goal, when to maintain the mission and when, despite challenge and facing diminishing returns, we should pivot in a new direction. Now, productive perseverance is coming up for all of us right now, both personally, professionally, and in terms of our organizations, evaluating as the market changes and shifts, as our global economy changes and shifts. Are our goals still the right goals? And are our means of achieving those goals still correct as well. So we have a hopeful little heuristic here for you, which is around navigating this polarity between when do I keep calm and stay the course, and when do I keep calm and shift gears. And this is an art and a science, and also a polarity that our most resilient leaders navigate. Moving on to the third practice of particularly resilient people is the idea of connection. Connecting with ourselves deeply, hearing that still small voice within, trusting our gut, knowing our worth, our value. These are all important parts of our internal connection and our external connection. Right? Being able to draw strength and support from our family members, our friends, our neighbors, our local communities. So connection to ourselves, as well as external connection to others. Now, I want to just tell you a quick story about Mary Barra. And most of you may know that Mary Barra is the CEO of General Motors, of GM. And one of the things that happened to her relatively early on, working in the auto industry in Detroit, male dominated, she was in the warehouses, in the workshops, and a young engineer would pass her every day on the factory floor, and he would make this shrill wolf whistle at her. Right? Now, if Kat and I were presenting to you in person, oftentimes we have a good Samaritan in the audience who gives us the wolf whistle for effect. We don't have that today, but it's a very loud whistle. So Mary was scared. She didn't want to go to work. You know, she didn't know what this guy was up to. She felt embarrassed. She went and she talked to him and she said, "What are you doing?" And what he said to her was fascinating. He says, "Well, I'm just saying hello to you. I'm just saying good morning to you." And she said, "Well, I would prefer if you would just say good morning to me." So the next day she comes to the factory floor. She looked at him. He looked at her. And lo and behold, he says, "Good morning." He doesn't do the whistle. And Mary talks about, you know, finding these ways to connect with people externally, as an example, in our places of work, even people that, you know, we don't initially resonate with, even people that might make us feel uncomfortable. And this is such a profound way to think about the world that we're living in today and the connections that we have with others. You know, resilience is the ability to facilitate these conversations that we're having right now about equity and equality and social justice, and the importance of a rising tide lifting all boats and developing a connection with ourselves and our employees, even in the midst, or especially in the midst, of what we're facing right now. The fourth practice of particularly resilient people is the practice of gratiosity. Now, what I wanted to do here was I wanted to account for what I was hearing from people, which is a sense of gratitude for having faced a challenge, even if a person didn't initially choose it, and also generosity, being able to share the lessons of the challenge with others so that people in our lives might learn vicariously through those lessons without having the experience themselves. And this is a great quote from Sheryl Sandberg, where she gave a commencement address, and she was talking about the joy that families must be experiencing as they watch their children graduate from university. And she also hearkened back to the loss of her late husband, Dave. And she said, "My hope is that you can find gratitude, not just on the good days like today, but on the hard ones when you really need it." So gratiosity is about finding the good in every challenge, and then also finding a way to generously share your experience, or leaders to share their experiences with others, so that other people within your organization and teams can learn vicariously. The fifth and final practice of particularly resilient people is that of possibility, the ability to see possibilities and potential for progress. It's a lot of P's, it's a lot of alliteration, in the face of obstacles. And so, you know, the first stroke of the Chinese character for crisis means danger. And the second stroke in the Chinese character for crisis means opportunity. And so possibility is about facing a crisis. And again, with the polarity, being able to privilege both the danger that we feel and experience in those moments for ourselves, our teams, our organizations, as well as the requisite opportunity. Now, there's something that I want to introduce you to here called the adversity quotient. And you might be aware of the adversity quotient. So for a long time, we thought IQ, or people's intelligence, was really going to be what made the difference. Then we thought it was EQ, or people's ability to be emotionally intelligent. And I think that's still true. But what's happening in our current environment is that what we're seeing is people who are the most successful, leaders who are the most successful, are the ones who are able to be both transformational and resilient. And what that means is facing adversity or facing challenge and being able to stay in that moment, to have a high AQ or adversity quotient, a high capacity for challenge, to be able to lead themselves and their teams. This fosters greater and greater resilience, our ability to face adversity or challenge. And so what I'd like to do is tie things up for you with a little quote here from Richard Paul Evans, where he says, usually life's greatest gifts come wrapped in adversity. So when we see challenge, when we see change, when we see complexity, know that that is not the period at the end of the sentence. That is the comma asking us if we want to go on. I'm going to go ahead and turn things back over to my colleague, Kat. We have some really exciting work planned for you for the balance of our presentation, and we're going to ask you to please join us in the Zoom link below, and I believe it's also been posted in the chat. Kat, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Taryn. Yes, I think we're all going to move over to Zoom, so if you could do that now, click the link there. And please go over, because we've got some really cool experiential activities to do with you that I think will really bring this stuff home. So we'll see you there in a moment.